Hi there, chaps. As you know, it's me, Dan, and I've got bit of a legend, really. I've been following her on the old Instagram stuff. Ex-copper, ex-Scotland Yard. He's just a legend with one hell of a story. And this is Peter Bleksey. I'm pronouncing Bleksey right, aren't I?
You certainly am. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, and thanks for having me on.
No, that's right. No, I just think some of the people who follow MANUP can learn from you, because you just, like I said to you before, you just ooze integrity. I have to give you credit, and I think integrity now is quite a rare thing. I hate saying that. I'm going to annoy people, and I apologise. It's just how I look at it. But I'm just like, you are so grounded.
Well, thank you. I'd like to think that I'm just a sort of regular bloke in the street, really. I mean, the fact that I go on telly and the radio, and I am rent-a-gob to a certain extent, it's just a byproduct of my life, what I've been through, and is now a considerable part of what I do. But yeah, I'm like so many fellas, I guess. I like to go and watch my football team. I like a pint. I adore my family. I enjoy work, and I try to rinse as much out of life as I possibly can, because we're not here for very long, are we?
No, we're not. Yeah, and that's a scary thought, but I think it's a thought what we should all remember as well.
Yeah. We're in the greater scheme of things, we're here for the blink of an eye. So I think it would be a shame to waste it. And of course, I've had some very dark times in my life. It's not all been one big jolly up, far from it. But it makes me all the more determined to rinse as much enjoyment out of life as I possibly can, not at the expense of others.
And that's the key, isn't it? And that's one thing I even say to my own kids. I'm like, do what you want in life as long as it doesn't upset others.
Yeah, of course.
That's it. So just give us a rundown for the people who don't know who you are. Give us a bit of a rundown about yourself.
Okay, my name's Peter Bleksey. I'm now, unfortunately, 62 years old. But as a teenager, I was a bit of an errant youth, product of a single parent family. My mum did brilliantly, did her best, but with no male role models about, I kind of went off the tracks a little bit. Until when I was 16, I came home one night to the flat that I shared with my mum, and there was an enormous copper in full uniform sitting in her lounge. And of course, my first thought was, crikey, what am I going to get nicked for? But actually, he sat me down and gave me a very kind of informative, mature, grown-up chat about the possibility of joining the police cadets. And he did a brilliant job. I was convinced. By the time he left the house, before he left, he pulled out the application forms out of his pocket, and I filled them in. A few weeks later, I went into the police cadets, loved it, discovered discipline, self-discipline, respect for myself, of course, respect for others, just transformed my life. Then became a PC 18 months later, went to Peckham, southeast London. And if I thought I'd been a bit of a jack-o'-lad around Bexley East, well, I suddenly found out I was a complete and utter marshmallow. And then became a detective. And then at the age of 25, was fortunate enough to become a Scotland Yard detective. Went up to the yard, 25, young, fit and fearless. Went on to the Central Drug Squad, which then was sort of the country's premier drug investigating unit. And of course, back in the 80s, we thought we were on the side of the angels, didn't we? We thought the war on drugs was a thing that could be fought and won, which, as we all know now, is an utter nonsense. The war on drugs will simply never, ever be won, can't be won. But back in the day, we thought we were doing the right thing. Worked undercover for over a decade, so pretending to be a gangster, buying millions and millions of pounds worth of drugs, lots of guns, counterfeit currency, millions of dollars, lorry loads of nick gear, scotch, trainers, whatever it was.
Wow.
And just was a pretty convincing gangster for over 10 years. Until, unfortunately, my work life and my whole life went completely belly up, because as a result of a job that I'd done, and it's a long story, but I'll try and cut it as short as I can. It was an international job, involved the DEA, the Drugs Enforcement Agency in the States, the FBI, the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, the British Customs, British police, lots of infighting. But doing the job was fine. Me and the undercover customs bloke, negotiated with about bad guys who were funded by terrorism. And a bloke ended up delivering 15 kilos of heroin to me in a hotel at Gatwick Airport. Now, at the time, and I'm talking about the 90s, that was the biggest seizure of heroin inland in the UK. Not at borders, obviously, that the customs had taken, but inland, it was the biggest seizure. Just goes to show, doesn't it? I mean, 15 kilos of smack now, people would sort of laugh at those kind of figures. But back in the day, that was what they'd called a big job in the old bill. And it was 4 million quid's worth of smack. Anyway, the bad guy got arrested. I got arrested, you know, for show, as did other people. And whilst they were all languishing in jail, they were thinking, well, where's that Peter, the Cockney South Londoner with a ponytail? Because believe it or not, I had a ponytail halfway down my back in those days. And so they figured out that I must have been an undercover cop. And they worked on the theory that if they killed me, they'd kill the evidence. Well, they were right to a certain extent. So there was a plot to kill me, which wasn't too much of a worry in those days because getting threatened was par for the course, and they'd have had no way of finding me. You know, there was no identifying features that I'd given them that they'd be able to track me down and come to my front door. But unfortunately, a report was drawn up about all of the operation because there was so much infighting amongst the bosses and the different agencies, all that kind of nonsense that just used to get in the way of stuff. This report was compiled and it had my real name in it about half a dozen times, as opposed to my undercover unit number, which should have gone in there. It was then printed off, taken out of a police building. The twat who wrote it and printed it off and took it out of that building then went shopping with the report in the back of the car in a briefcase, an unmarked car. And guess what? That car got broken into and the report got stolen. So now we've got a situation with the report with my real name in it and the pre-existing conspiracy to kill me, which had been discovered by the FBI on a phone tap in Boston. So I was in very real danger. I got a phone call saying, don't go home, from one of the bosses at the yard. Come to the yard tomorrow morning. We'll tell you what it's all about. I rocked up at Scotland Yard the following morning, bright and early, long before they expected me there. A mate of mine gave me a copy of the report. And by the close of play that day, having just read this report in utter disbelief with my name emblazoned all over it, by the close of play that day, it was decided that I had to abandon my home, abandon my life, and get parachuted into the witness protection program. And I lived in the witness protection program for 2 years, 2 very miserable years, when I was conspiracy theorizing as to how did it all come to this. I was still expected to work undercover, believe it or not, and live in this bloody hideout in a completely moody identity. Well, that was never going to be sustainable. I drank too much. I smoked too much. And after 2 years of that, I had a catastrophic mental health breakdown. And I realized how desperately ill I was when I started becoming a danger to other people, not only just myself. And so I was admitted to a lock-in psychiatric ward where I spent 3.5 weeks with the wonderful doctors and nurses of the NHS trying to piece me back together again.
So you was actually sectioned?
I wasn't sectioned.
Right, okay.
I assaulted a mate in a pub, a sort of a mate, a bloke I knew, a pub mate, you know what I mean? Not a mate, a pub mate. Yeah. I assaulted him in the pub over a bit of tittle-tattle, just nonsense really, but showed how ill I was. And I'd very nearly brought a bar stool down on his head. And if I had done, I'd have killed him, because I'd knocked him off the bar stool, picked the bar stool up, and then went, and I'm literally bringing it down on his head. And somebody shouted out "Bleksey" as I was doing it. And I fortunately just had one of those lucid moments, because I've always found when I've had my mental health issues that, of course, there's been periods when I've been really poorly and my thinking has been very distorted and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I would also have lucid times, and I'd try and cling on to those lucid times as much as I could. And it was literally one of those lucid split seconds as the bar stool came down that made me stop, throw it aside, walk off, sit down and go, crikey, you know, I could have just killed someone then. So I rang a mate, well, people in the pub as well started ringing around other mates, and a proper mate turned up, took one look at me, stuck me in his car, drove me to what was then Greenwich District Hospital in South East London. It's now flats, of course.
Yeah.
And they admitted me, psychiatrists came and spoke to me, and then they admitted me. So I avoided being sectioned, but if I'd resisted getting in my mate's car in any way, shape or form, I would have been sectioned. It was as simple as that.
You probably wouldn't have even been here, would you, really, in this?
No, certainly not. My life would have been extremely different, very, very different. And, it was, of course, a real shock to the system to be locked in this psychiatric unit with some desperately ill people who I had enormous sympathy for, but I was very ill myself, which was borne out by the fact that it was 3.5 weeks before they considered discharging me. And even then, a lot of things had to be in place. There had to be other therapies and medications, and I had to have a suitable place to live and people living with me and all of that before they would consider discharging me. But they did. And then, of course, I became an outpatient.
Did it make it worse because of your job? Because I would have thought you being, well, not just a copper, you're quite a high up copper. You train to defend yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the mid-90s, and of course, mental health awareness wasn't anything like it is today. Yeah. And there was a lot of stigma around. There was a lot of stigma. Yeah. I mean, and of course, some people with the police were very distrusting of me. They hadn't been, but they were when I suddenly was ill, which, made a bad situation worse. A very senior police officer from Scotland Yard went down to my dear old mum's house and said to my mum, well, I think he just needs a kick up the arse. Right? And I'm desperately ill in hospital with such distorted thinking. That's kind of like a snapshot of how it was in those days, how some people thought. Another detective went into the local pub, which was run by my mate, who was still a great mate of mine, was best man at my wedding. And this detective said to my mate, he's putting it all on, isn't he? He's trying to work himself an ill health ticket. And my mate was coming to visit me every day in hospital, and he knew how desperately ill he was. Yeah. Needless to say, that particular detective did not get served, and got told in no uncertain fashion that he might want to go and try and get a drink somewhere else. Yeah. You find out who your real mates are, don't you?
I absolutely, especially when I've had full-blown breakdowns before, and actually 2 or 3 people have actually really been there. The rest of them just vanished, completely and utterly vanished, and I still haven't spoken to them to this day. Do you know what? Actually, they've now started to speak to me a bit more because I've started a charity. And it does frustrate me sometimes. Like, oh, okay, now you suddenly want to be there to support. Now that I've made something out of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to start ranting at you, so I apologise. But I think, how on earth are you still so grounded?
Well, I mean, that wasn't my only mental health breakdown. So that was about the mid-90s. I got medically retired from the cops in 1999. My autobiography got published in 2000, and that propelled me into the media. And then around about 2005, 2006, I decided that, I was well, my mental health was robust. I didn't need the meds anymore. And I didn't need to tell my doctor about that. I'll just sack the meds. Everybody can guess what's coming next, can't they? Yeah. And I had another serious breakdown, which led to me being hospitalized again. On that occasion, I think it was only for about 10 days or so. But I had got really poorly again. And it taught me a lesson. Funnily enough, on that occasion, because there'd been about a decade between me being hospitalized, the meds had moved on. They'd become a bit more refined, because science is always evolving, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so on that occasion, they put me on meds, which were different then, which I'm still on today, albeit I'm on a very low maintenance dose. So by and large, I've been on meds for my mental health for best part of 25 years. But I've got no qualms about that. My GP, who I haven't seen for a long time, but, you know, pre-COVID, I would go and see every year for a checkup. He was like, well, Peter, you know, the meds have been reduced from 5 milligram to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. And I've been on 1 milligram now for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, I suppose. And he said, you know, shall we get you off them entirely? And because I'd become so ill the second time by sacking the meds, I said, no, doctor, you know, I'm fine. I'm on them. Yeah. You know, and there's that old saying, isn't there? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, yeah. You know, my mental health isn't broken. So why would I think of going off the meds? Yeah, all right. If you pull the leaflet out of the box, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like about 50,000 words of we're all going to die, you know, because they're all terrifying, aren't they? The side effects and all that sort of stuff. But I just go, no, you know, I'd rather stick with my meds. As I say, a low maintenance dose. I take it, you know, each night before I go to bed, because my mental health is now robust and it's good, and I can, you know, rip the granny out of life every day and enjoy myself. You know, I don't mean by tearing it up, but I mean by being enthusiastic about work and doing what I want to do and being with my family and going to QPR and just living the best life I possibly can within my means and doing what I like. So yeah, I'm still on them and will be until my dying day. And I've no qualms, as you can see, about speaking publicly about the meds.
Well, you know? good on you, actually, because I did a video with a doctor not that long ago, a couple of months ago, let's say within 6 months. I've done so many, I forgot. And he said in the video, he goes, actually, when I give meds out, if they've been on meds over a year, they're probably going to have them for the rest of their life. And I had a couple of messages about it. I was like, well, how can he say that? I'm like, well, he's a doctor. Right. But first of all, so that's for the NHS, and let's face it, that they are the people to get the advice from. I think sometimes I'm high function, what we call borderline personality disorder. If you didn't know me, you probably wouldn't notice, hence the word high function and all this kind of stuff. But I'm well aware that actually I'm probably going to have this for the rest of my life. Does it bother me? No. Does it cause me wobbles? Of course it does. I'm not going to lie about that. Sounds like they're high functioning depressive sometimes. That can sometimes kick in. But I know my triggers. But if I go, well, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life, I'm going to beat myself up. I ain't going to progress. So I'm like, learn my triggers and learn what's good for me.
Yeah. I mean, as for diagnoses, well, I've been diagnosed with everything from chronic schizophrenia to anxiety and depression, right? And it's my two catastrophic episodes were neither of those. Yeah. Actually, I think, you know, the psychiatrist that I put have most confidence in, he actually described it as having psychotic episodes. Yeah. And I think that's probably what it is. And I'm determined not to have another psychotic episode, which I'm really reassured by you telling me the story about what your doctor said, because of course I've only got mental health experience. I've got no qualifications in it whatsoever. I just speak from my personal experiences. But I'm glad I heard that, because I'm fine with taking meds for the rest of my life. Yeah. You know, if they work, why wouldn't you? If you had a dodgy ticker, you'd take something for that, wouldn't you? Yeah. You know, if you had chronic pain, you'd take something for that. So why should there be any stigma whatsoever about those of us that take meds every day for our mental health? I'd far rather that than find myself in a lock-in psychiatric ward for the third time, which I really don't want to do.
No, exactly. Well, it's also that thing, isn't it? With me and my happy pills and all this kind of stuff, I'm giving back to society, and let's play all that card as well. I run a business, I run a charity. I'm all right, actually.
Yeah, exactly. They enable us to function. So, you know, thank you very much indeed to the clever people who did pay attention at school, unlike me, who flunked my education.
Yeah. Absolutely. So because obviously you've been through a lot of trauma. I know it was your job, but you must have seen some traumatic stuff. How do you move away from that of just not letting the past eat you up?
Yeah, but funnily enough, I've been in a lot of very hairy situations, obviously working undercover for 10 years,
Yeah,
being threatened, being strip searched, being rubbed down, being accused of being an undercover cop, living in constant threat of that assassin's bullet in the back of your head, checking under the car every day to make sure somebody hasn't put a device under it, and all those kind of things. I've had met thousands of those kind of experiences. But in terms of seeing mutilated bodies, for example, that was never my bag, because when I was 19, I had to report a fatal accident. An old lady who very tragically had been run over on a pedestrian crossing, and I had to investigate that and report it, deal with it. And I went to the post-mortem, and it had a really negative effect upon me. I just knew that kind of like, blood and bodies and all that kind of stuff were just not for me. So whilst I did take part in some murder investigations during my detective career, I always told the governors, I'm not doing the exhibits because I'm not going to the post-mortems, and I'm not going to the scene until until the body's been removed, because I'm just no good at that, good at it at all. If we went to when I was in uniform, if we went to a traffic accident, I'd be the first one to volunteer to direct the traffic around the accident and not go to the car and deal with the injured people, because I'm just no good at the sight of blood, and I can't stand looking at dead bodies. So my kind of trauma and stresses were very different from the trauma and stresses that another detective in a different kind of work might experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, because I know I forgot where I was going with that one now. So,
No worries.
I'm just mesmerised. So I'm just like, now it makes sense. Obviously, you've learned your triggers. You've known you know how to be you and not let other people stuff sway you. You know how to keep your head straight by knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Yeah, I mean, my life still has a lot of stress in it, my working life, because for the last 3 years, I've been hunting a fugitive from Liverpool, a guy called Kevin Parle, which is the subject of a BBC podcast, unashamed plug here, Manhunt, Finding Kevin Parle, BBC's top true crime podcast of 2020, and probably going to be top true crime podcast of this year as well. Can find it across all your Spotify, Apple, BBC Sounds, all of that.
I'll do the whole linky thing anyway for you.
Thank you very much. So forgive me, I'll just crack on then. So, hunting Kevin Parle has been, there's a lot of stresses involved, a lot of stresses. I've traveled a lot, been to Spain a couple of times, Dubai, Ireland, and sometimes I'm in pressured environments. I've got people that are trying to deliberately give me incorrect information. They're trying to drain my money, waste my time, and drain my emotions. And some of them have been pretty good at it. So there are a lot of stresses, and I work long hours virtually every day, and I'm always putting in a shift at weekends. There's no such thing in my life as a day when I do not do any work. And I'm not blaming anybody for that or moaning about it, because it was all my idea to try and find Kevin Parle. And I will find him, by the way. But I have to learn how to cope with those stresses. So what don't I do? At the end of a very stressful day, I might enjoy a beer, but it's not going to be 8 pints of Stella, 3 Jaegers, and half a bottle of whiskey, because that ain't going to make anything any better. Now, I've drunk to those kind of levels, obviously back in my youth as well. But I did drink very heavily when I was in witness protection. and that was a contributory factor. You know, that was my part in my own downfall. Yeah, of course, I didn't write the report, lose it, and all that stuff, and force me into witness protection. But that was my part in my downfall, the very heavy and consistent drinking. I still like to drink. I love to go out. I like getting drunk.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
No, but I don't get drunk 7 days a week, you know, and I don't use drink if I've had a particularly stressful day. I don't use drink as a way of either blotting it out, forgetting about it, or trying to make it better.
Yeah.
You know, because I think none of the above work. I enjoy a drink, and as long as I'm getting more out of a drink than drink is getting out of me, then I'm fine. And of course, I don't drink every day.
Yeah, and it's very easy to wander, dance that line, isn't there? There really is. But yeah, I'm not that as well. If I'm mega stressed out or whatever, I just won't touch drink.
Yeah, and gear, right? We can't have a chat amongst men without talking about gear, because gear is everywhere, right? We all know that.
Yeah.
You know, and I've always said I can go anywhere in the UK, anywhere. I don't care whether it's if I'm having a slice of Victoria sponge and a cup of tea with Mrs. Miggins in a Cotswold cottage, or if I'm in the depths of an area of chronic deprivation in any of our cities, you know, wherever you can go. It's a phone call, it's a few minutes, a bit of gear is never far away. Whether that's a smoke, whether it's bugle, whether it's anything you fancy. And of course, now you got kids on ket and all sorts of stuff.
I remember, okay, my youngest is 10. And I remember it must be a couple of years ago when he went to me and was like, "Can you smell weed?" I'm like, how do you know? I haven't touched weed in years.
Yeah.
I don't touch anything now, but it's just, I'm like, how do you know what weed smells like?
Yeah.
That's scary. It is. It's scary.
Well, because it's everywhere. You know, I mean, I could talk about the need for drug law reform and all that, but that's not what we're talking about. But what I will say is, again, being a witness of truth, right? I am no stranger to drugs, right? Yeah. I'm very pleased to say I've not touched a bit of gear, any gear whatsoever, for 17 years.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, the last 17 years have been the best 17 years of my life. Now, I'm not a Puritan. If people want to do a bit of gear, you know, then that's fine. It's up to them. But this is a mental health podcast we're talking about here.
Yeah.
You know, and gear and robust mental health, for me, are not natural bedfellows.
Yeah.
They're really not. I'm not a Puritan. I'm not a killjoy. And I know there are some people that will say, I've been a stoner all my life. You know, started in my teens. I'm now 412 and I've smoked a big bifter all my life. All right, fine. That's okay. It's worked for you. If you've been all right, you know, fine. But there's so much evidence about psychosis, depression, all that kind of stuff, you know, wrapped around gear. My advice would be don't. If you've got any kind of mental health issue whatsoever, then I reckon getting wrapped around a bit of gear of any description is probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's bloody science what backs it up.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You know, and I know it's everywhere, and I know temptation is huge, right? But let's talk about Charlie for everywhere, because we know that's, you know, that is absolutely everywhere, right? Chances are, if I walk up to the boozer at the end of my road tonight, I could make a phone call, you know, have a chat with someone and get myself an 8-ball, I would imagine, in a matter of minutes, right? But it's only going to be about 15-20% pure gear anyway. So it's utter frigging jank. You're getting ripped off, you're wasting your money, right? It ain't going to be good for your mental health. And if ever, I try and urge people to do this, and some people do, whether they're having a smoke, whether they're shoveling bugle up their router or whatever it is they're doing, I say, get your mobile phone, right? Get your mobile phone and go to voice notes.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you're having a joint, you know, you think you understand modern jazz, don't you? You know what I mean? You empty the contents of your fridge, work your way through 4 boxes of Maltesers, but press your voice notes when you're getting stoned. I don't care what it's on, what bit of gear it is you're having. Press the voice notes on your phone and just let it run. Let it record for 2, 3, 4 hours, and then turn it off at the end of the night. And the following day, or whenever you get sober, or you've got your head straight, or this, that, and the other, and you think you're Charlie Big Potatoes because you take a bit of gear and you're really the most interesting person in the room, right? Well, you play that voice notes back. And I guarantee you that'll be a very, very good deterrent for ever doing gear ever again, because you'll find out what a twat you sounded the previous night. What a completely tiresome, boring, repetitive dick you sounded, right? And I know people who've done it and they've gone, Peter, good shout. You're right.
So where did you learn about that yourself? That sounds like self-experience.
Yeah. Well, of course, I've told you, I'm no stranger to drugs.
Yeah.
I had been that interminable bore. You know, when you've done a frigging, you know, a couple of lines of bugle, you think you're the most interesting person on the planet. You've got to tell everybody what you're thinking because it's so interesting and it's so important. You're an utter snore off. You know, I've seen it in others as well. I've seen it in myself. So I've just come up with this idea some years ago, and I've suggested it to many, many people, and it's worked with some.
Yeah.
Just record yourself and then tell me you're the real cool cat the following morning when you listen to it.
I'm just glad when I'm just glad that I don't do anything anymore, because I would have sounded like a right prick.
Yeah, you and me both. And let's face it, you know what I mean? And when I go out these days, you know, whether I'm out at a party with my wife or this, that, and the other, and bear in mind we're of a particular age, so we don't go to a lot of places where people are doing gear. But from time to time, it's inevitable. You go in a pub, somebody you haven't seen for ages comes up to you. Hello, Blex, how are you? You know, and very, very quickly, you know, they're on it.
Yeah.
You know, so of course I try and swerve them, but sometimes, you know, because they're so important and they've got to tell you what they're thinking, you know, they don't frigging leave you alone. And just I tell them all, press your voice notes, record yourself, play it back when you're head straight, and then come and tell me you're the coolest frigging geezer you've ever met. Absolutely. You ain't.
I know damn well I'm going to be cutting that section out of the podcast and using that as a little clip, because that's gold. Absolutely gold. So just before two things there, just before we draw to a close-ish kind of thing, do you want to plug a bit more about Kevin? Because I think the thing is, for me, is I have heard that story. I vaguely remember that from a few years ago. But let's face it, there are families out there who have lost a loved one.
Yeah, they're of course. I'm a writer these days, you know, and I've written 4 books, 3 plays for Radio 4 and that kind of stuff. But for the last 3 years, I have been hunting Kevin Powell, right? 6'6", Liverpudlian Kevin Powell. He's wanted for 2 separate murders, both in Liverpool. 16-year-old boy Liam Kelly in 2004, 22-year-old mother of 3 young children, Lucy Hargreaves, in 2005. Our BBC podcast, Manhunt, Finding Kevin Powell, massively popular, over 5 million downloads and counting. Please, is very much worth a look. I'm going to be making an announcement on social media in the next 2, maybe 3 weeks, when I'm launching something which, again, is original, has never been done before by a private individual, all with an effort to try and find him. I've also written a book about the first 18 months of my hunt for Kevin Powell. That's on Audible and Kindle and all that. It's just called Manhunt. And yeah, please spread the word about Kevin Powell, because that's how I'm shrinking the world for him. It is actually me, my pen, my notebook, and my mobile phone versus global, serious and organised crime. And they're very, very cheesed off with me. And that's great, because it means I'm doing my job. And I simply will not rest. And I will find him. Yeah. This is a collective effort. The banner that's behind me says the People's Hunt for Kevin Powell, which is what I renamed it, because so many thousands of people are continuing to help me. So yeah, please just Google Kevin Powell, P-A-R-L-E, and you'll find it all there. Spread the word, have a listen, download, subscribe, all of that, please. And come and join the journey with me, and have a listen, have a read. And then when he's captured, if you have shared his name with someone, if they've then listened to the podcast and have helped shrink the world for him, when he's captured, you will be quite rightly able to say, I did my bit.
Exactly.
You know, for truth over lies, for right over wrong, for hope over fear. So yes, please do, everybody. That would be brilliant.
Absolutely that. So no, I think the last thing really, we always end the videos of like, if somebody's watching this as resonate, or they're feeling like they're having a bit of a wobble, mental health wobble, what would you, I think you've already answered it, but if someone's watching this and they're feeling a bit shit, what would you say to them? What's your advice?
Talk. Please talk. If you've got a friend, a family member, you know, that mate, somebody you can talk to, please, as a first step, talk. Then get the medical help you need. I know it can be difficult, you know, doctor's appointments are hard to come by and all of that, but please do stick at it. It may come with frustrations, but please do. So talk, medical help, and if meds are prescribed, please take the meds. As an aside, don't drink excessively, and don't go anywhere near a bit of gear, please.
Yeah, that was a good call. I really enjoyed that. Let me hit the record button, Finny Bajiggy. There we go.